it's thinking about it.
Well, I just got a notification that it's live now, so.
Okay, all right.
Great, that last minute technology prayer work. Good. Okay, well, I'm June Kales. I'm a disability policy consultant and the contractor with CFILC in California's Disaster Coalition, and the organizer and the host for these emergency policy and practice discussions. So Naya, let's start with your accessibility brief information.
Yes, of course. So hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Naya Glenn. I'm a program coordinator at California Foundation for Independent Living Centers, and I've been with CFILC for about 2 months now. I will be moderating today's meeting. For accessibility purposes, I'll be going over a list of options. First off, if you would like to access captions, you can go to the meeting controls on the bottom of your screen and select the CC icon titled Live Transcript. You may also click on the option to show subtitles to gain access to captioning. I'll also be dropping a stream text link into the chat, which you can also use. This is a great option because you can change the font size, color, or make the captioning full screen. So I'll now go ahead and hand it over to June to get started.
And if all of you, if you can, introduce yourself in chat, your name, your organization, city and state, that'd be great. And also use the chat for your questions. Just if you're writing a comment, just say comment. If you're writing a question for Allie, just start it with Q or questions, and we'll have a big long period where you can ask all kinds of questions today. We're going to start with my asking Allie a few startup questions, and then we'll open it up to all of you. And just a reminder that next month we are doing a focus call on hybrid meetings, exploring, why they're important, accessibility, what does it take, what are some of the budget issues, what are some of the incremental steps, lessons to apply, and more. And our panel will be Tim Mann and Sadie Martinez from Colorado, and Shaylin Schuzels from the partnership. So with in September, no call in September. I'll be away, but October will be our last call in this series of policy and practice discussions. And that topic is yet to be announced, so stay tuned. So, Allie, over to you. Let's start by your giving us some of your background. How did you get into the disaster field?
Yeah, so it was kind of happenstance with what my county experienced back in 2018. So I was living in Butte County, post-graduation, working in a completely different field, mostly in corporate work, actually, and looking to kind of segue into nonprofit work. And it was an interesting time with what was kind of available for jobs. And we then experienced the 2018 Camp Fire. And so immediately I had been, volunteering, at a local shelter, saw my local shelter have a pretty direct influx through the domestic violence shelter in need as people were put into, homes with family members and had to make choices that maybe were a little outside of the scope of what they were used to in their previous pre-disaster normal. And I wanted to look for ways to get involved with the recovery aspect. our town became very impacted here in Chico as thousands of people relocated into the city. Our city became very impacted with trailers and RVs on almost every street corner. And of course, you could cut the smoke in the air with a knife. It was so thick for about a month. It looked like a war zone here. And so most of us here in town looked for ways to get involved with that recovery aspect and or the relief efforts that were going on, whether it was pulling together clothes or meal vouchers or what have you. And I really wanted to look at the other end of it. So I ended up finding a job with United Way of Northern California, and I came on as their disaster services coordinator in 2019 when they had gotten kind of their funding ready for the recovery aspect. We joined the table with about 12 other agencies looking to do case management work for individuals that had experienced the Camp Fire, whether it was home loss, work loss. Most people, the fire was so devastating, most people did lose their home in entirety, or at least had some partial damage within the town of Paradise. So we had 13 case management agencies that came forward. United Way was one of them, and I started working one-on-one with families to develop recovery plans to move them from essentially homeless, living either in trailers, hotels, or family friends' homes. And we moved right into trying to figure out, okay, what does it look like to get housing again? What are the barriers that you're experiencing? And what can we do to move you forward? And through that, we really realized that recovery had several phases to it. So we've got this kind of relief stage where people are kind of more in their fight or flight period. And movement on long-term recovery isn't really possible. And then we've got this kind of two-phased recovery, where recovery may look, there's a temporary recovery and a permanent recovery. So temporary recovery may look like, hey, I'm not living in my car or my trailer any longer. I'm able to get an apartment, but maybe that's not my permanent plan. And it certainly doesn't move me into my pre-disaster normal. My pre-disaster normal might look more like rebuilding a home. So we took this very holistic approach. And as I kind of moved through the motions of what it looked like with my families that I was helping recover, United Way started to take more of a different approach to recovery. And we started pivoting towards more of a funder aspect for those that were providing these case management services, especially as we got impacted by more fires. So I responded during my 3 years at United Way to probably about, I want to say 12 fires within the Northern California footprint. 3 of those approached a long-term recovery phase. And through that, we developed kind of the unmet needs table, which is essentially a table of funders after a recovery that get together and help to bridge barriers and gaps between people's long-term recovery plan and the finances that go along with that. Because in order to recover, you need to have enough funding to do things like rebuild a home and furnish that home. So we'd work together as funders in the room to try to merge people from one end to the other. And we began kind of really developing understanding that these fires weren't going away. A lot of these individuals, we had maybe recovered in previous fires, and now we're recovering them again as they've relocated to a new county. So they've been impacted twice. So we developed kind of a metric for how we navigate these fires and navigate these recovery plans. by setting precedent of how we do and don't respond to specific needs, and to make it kind of, recovery is a holistic approach, so not cut and dry, but at least give us stopgaps of what that looked like, how we develop expectations for community members as they're reaching out for support. So took this very holistic approach to wildfire recovery. And at that point, it was time for me to start spreading my wings a little bit further and find my next step. I'd done a lot of growth. I always kind of tease everybody about disaster time. You do a lot of growth when you're in that microcosm of fast moving recovery, relief, preparation. And so I ended up finding the the application for CFILC, which was more of a statewide program. And I was ready to kind of take my knowledge and skills that I built up over the years of how to respond and navigate disaster and emergencies over to broaden it a little bit farther past just wildfire relief.
Well, we could have a whole other call on what you just said, for sure. But for those of you who want more information on recovery, Allie was part of a prior panel on one of these calls. So if you look at the CFILC YouTube channel, you can find that prior call on recovery and hear more about this enormous issue that never ever gets enough attention. So I know you definitely piqued my curiosity to want to know more, but today's focus is on power. So let's pivot to your current position, your responsibilities at CF with DIDAR, your staff, your funding, and the focus.
Absolutely. So for starters, I'm Allie Feldmeyer. I'm the DIDAR manager. That stands for Disability Disaster Access and Resources. Right now, I have 3 other staff members. One of them is on this call. It's Nia Glenn. They are a coordinator here at CF. We also have Carla Leon, our program coordinator level 2. And we have our assistant manager, Lisa Austin. And those are the staff that make up us. My role as the DIDAR manager is to take an approach to the needs of our power dependent disabled community members, and advocate for their needs before, during, and after an emergency. What we do know about emergencies is they typically have a tendency to impact power. Most notably, recently we had these atmospheric rivers that came through. We saw, a multitude of power outages as a result of high winds, taking down power lines, whether that's a fallen tree, or even just hazards on the road, taking out power lines, lightning strikes, and there's a myriad of opportunities for the power to go out. And what happens when the power goes out and your livelihood depends on that power? So we work hand in hand. Our primary funder right now is PG&E. We work hand in hand with that power utility company. We're working on additional contracts with other power utility companies, other larger scale power utility companies here in California, to see if we could bridge the gap from one end of the state to the other. Right now, PG&E is primarily working within Central California. It's up to Northern California. So when a certain amount of consumers are impacted by power outages, we mobilize to ensure that they have what they need to survive during a power outage. Making sure I'm answering your question, June, was there another prong to that?
Let's see, we did staff, we did funding, and we just focus. So I think we're good. So let's get into the details of, the activations during all of these power loss events, including public safety power shutoffs, which are still, but not for long, coming to California. And, tell us about, with your experience and your activations, what worked and what needs work?
Yeah, that's a big question. It's a big one.
I'll keep prompting.
Yeah. Keep me on track as I go through the motions in my head. So, essentially, just to kind of pull it back, the kinds of assistance that we provide the public, just in general, are kind of emergency planning. So that's the preparation before we have a disaster. We do disaster go kits. So these are, again, part of your emergency planning, and that can vary from center to center. We work with our DDARC centers. So we've got several centers throughout the state of California, helping us within our network mobilize to provide this assistance, and they can get creative with what a go kit means to them. But the main cruxes of what we do in DDAR are backup batteries, emergency planning, and active event support. So active event support can look like mobilizing those backup batteries out there, which are pre-charged and ready to go, typically at your center, at the DDAR center. Hotel accommodations, transportation to the hotel. And then once you're at the hotel, we can provide food and gas, or food or gas to get to the hotel if gas money is a barrier to getting out to safety. And then for those that choose to stay, because we do have a lot of individuals that may choose to stay. You may be living in rural California and you've got livestock, and someone's got to be there to tend to the animals, or your 5 dogs can't go into a hotel, but you've got a backup generator to help keep your temperature regulated, which is your primary concern, or charge your devices. We can provide support for gift cards to charge your to provide gas and propane for your generators. So we've got a couple tiers of what in-event support looks like. So what kind of event might trigger a in-event support activity? So the 2 types of categories are really PSPS, which are public safety power shutoffs. These are planned outages. The goal is to prevent wildfires due to high wind and extreme heat. So that combo means PG&E needs to shut off the power lines in order to prevent a fire. We're prepped in advance. We get 24 hours notice from the DDARs or from PG&E so that we can start making outreach calls to our consumers and get ahead of the robocalls to make sure that, hey, is your battery charged? Are we geared to go? It's looking like you may lose power. Make sure that your devices have a full charge, and make sure your backup battery is ready to go. And if that doesn't work out, give us a call and we'll mobilize to get you accommodations. So they start providing that outreach the second we get that activation status from PG&E. And that's not to say that you can't call in and get support. The way that you would call in and get support is calling the customer service line with PG&E. They submit a referral over to us, and our DDAR coordinators over at CF field who that goes to. We funnel it off to the DDARC and the coordinators at the relevant DDARC, so their local DDAR center. They'll respond to that individual. We also get a lot of calls that just they know about us, they know we're ready to go, and we're able to help them. So they'll call us and let us know that they need support. So there's a few ways that you can get assistance. We either know about you, you know about us, or to call PG&E.
Let me just insert. You mentioned the desire centers. Can you be a little more specific about how many are there and what's the coverage look like?
Yeah, so let me pull up the contact sheet so I make sure I list them all. Mm,
We might be able to put it in chat. Just kind of, are there 10 or 13 or?
Let me, question I wasn't quite prepared to answer yet. Let's see.
And Michael, I see your hand. We'll get to the questions in a little bit. So not ignoring you.
So let me pivot and let me pull up our web page so that I can put in the chat how to find your dark. So I'm putting in the chat our upload of where all of our DDARC centers are. So you can locate your local DDARC. We've got quite a few of them. We have them located all over the state of California, regardless of whether or not you have PG&E, because everyone's eligible for the program. There are different localities that make you eligible for specific parts of the program. So in order to be eligible, let's say for the battery portion of our program, you need to be living in a high fire threat district, level tier 2 or 3, or you need to have experienced a PSPS, a public safety power shutoff, and you need to be located within PG&E power territory. So,
okay, let me just, so we have a lot of out-of-staters listening to you as well. So level 2 and level 3, just in general, means?
So level 2, level 3 means you are living in an area that is at exponential risk of the power being shut off when we have that marriage between heat and high wind. So typically these are more rural areas, hilled areas, areas with lots of trees, lots of brush, lots of things to catch on fire, and have higher difficulty for emergency responders to get to. So they take PG&E provides us with a map where we can look up a zip code and figure out, is this individual a PG&E consumer? And is this consumer living in an area that is at a higher risk of fire threat? Where the fire is going to be more devastating, right? For me, right, I'm in downtown Chico. I do not live in a high fire threat area. There's lots of concrete and pavement around me. That's likely to keep me a little bit more safe. But if I go up the hill 20 minutes, that's a one exit road, lots of trees, lots of brush around me. That's a level 2. I know that up in Cohasset, that's a level 2. So it can range depending on what your geographical area looks like. And then of course you have to be located in California, period, to have any participation in our program. We don't assist out of state. So if you were calling in from Colorado and you wanted assistance from one of our centers with emergency planning, we would try to get you connected with maybe emergency management agency in your area, or recommend you contact your local independent living center. So California based PG&E portion for the batteries for the batteries or hotel assistance or those active event assistance portions. At this current juncture with our funder, with PG&E, you'd have to be located within PG&E territory. Like I said, we're working on other contracts, so hopefully down the line here pretty soon, we'll be able to incorporate that statewide. And then everyone is qualified in California for emergency planning and for disaster go kits and readiness training. And that kind of one-on-one support for that. We have, let's see, we have 20 DARCs. We're about to add a 20 to 21 here pretty soon as we get gearing up for our next round of contracts. So we've got Cal Life, which is Los Angeles, CID, which is San Francisco, San Mateo, CRIL, which is Alameda and does most cities, this Alameda cities except for Oakland and just a couple zip codes in Alameda. We've got DAC. They do Butte, Glen, Lassen, Modoc, Plumas, Shasta, Siskiyou, and Tehama. So that's a very large footprint. We have DCRC. They do West Los Angeles, like the coastal area. DRAIL, DRAIL, which is Alpine, Amador, Calaveras, Mariposa, San Joaquin, Stanislaus, Tuolumne. We have DRC, which does Los Angeles, but the Long Beach and Orange County portion. We have DSLC, which is Lake Mendocino, Napa, Sonoma. Freed, Colusa, El Dorado, Nevada, Placer, Sierra, Sutter, Yuba. ILCKC, which does Kern. ILRC, which does San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, Ventura. ILRSCC, which does Contra Costa and Solano. MCIL does Marin. RICV does Fresno, Kings, Madera, Tulare. RIL does Sacramento and Yolo. RSI does Inyo, Mono, Riverside, San Bernardino. Skill does Eastern Los Angeles and gets down to San Diego. SVLC does Monterey, San Benito, Santa Clara, Santa Cruz. TCIL does Del Norte, Humboldt, Trinity. And the SIL does Alameda, but only the cities of, only specific cities in Alameda or zip codes in Alameda, and then they do Oakland.
Quite a list.
Quite a list, yeah. Lots of people gunning for support. And Walter, I do see your comment in here about portable batteries. I'm gonna get to that in our advice section. I definitely I definitely agree with you. Batteries are not the solution.
Well, let's kind of go there. I don't know if I'm jumping in or not, but what's working in all this and what's not working in this?
Well, let's kind of first actually talk about the other tier, not just PSPS that activates us, because I think that's going to feed into why I would say batteries are not the solution to this problem. They're a resource, right? They're a resource. They're not the solution. And that is 100% not what our agency advocates that it is. So let's go ahead and pull back up my notes. So the other activation event category that we've got PSPS. So that's the planned outages, but we also have weather related events that result in the power going out. So these are unplanned outages. Obviously, we don't know when the power is going to go out or where it's going to go out, because we don't know where lightning is going to strike or where a tree is going down. So it's determined by the number of consumers without power in an impacted area that helps activate us for that territory. Once we're activated, we start contacting those impacted areas to start servicing their needs. And the services can vary depending on the weather type event. So, for example, if it's dangerous for us to be delivering a battery and it's too wet for us to be delivering a battery, right? Because these are unpackaged batteries that we're going to be providing you. they can't get wet. So we won't be able to then deliver a battery during that point. So we're going to advocate for getting you into a hotel where it's going to be safe, it's going to be dry, it's going to be warm, or cool, depending on what your needs are. And then we'll set you up with if you need transportation, we'll help get you there. Or if you need food vouchers, we'll make sure that you have accommodations to ensure that leaving your home isn't a barrier. And so what I think my biggest concern is during a PSPS and these weather related events and the batteries, is we tend to get very in DAR, and once consumers understand we have this resource, they tend to think about it more like a generator, and it's not. It's a battery. It needs power in order to power it up to last you for the duration of your outage. So it gets a charge, and the goal is that it can charge your devices. It's not intended to be a permanent solution, right? It's not going to be able to run your air conditioner. It's not going to be able to run your refrigerator. It's specifically for your devices. It's specifically for your devices to ensure that, if you need a CPAP machine at night, you can run that at night in order to be able to breathe. Or if you need a power chair, if you use a power chair, when your power chair goes out, you can ensure that it gets a full charge, and hopefully that'll get you through. Now, the problem is when you have a power outage for multiple days, or we're experiencing what we did in the winter storm, where power is flickering on and off for almost a month. These batteries are not going to save your life. They are not going to ensure that you have enough power to even have your independence. So there becomes a shift in ensuring, do you have the resources to get out? How do we ensure that you're not left behind and your needs are met in a disaster? How do we help get you over to a hotel? Is that accessible for you? How do we make sure that we find an accessible hotel for you? How do we advocate? And also it becomes a real clear where the focus too is of our program, which is really on emergency management, emergency planning, and advocacy in that planning stage. So I always really encourage my DAR coordinators to really focus on the emergency planning stage, because if you know what you're going to do if you're experiencing an extended outage, you're much more prepared to shift your idea of what a perfect storm looks like for you. You have a backup plan. You know what to do. So the focus really needs to be on emergency management emergency planning for how we navigate with our conversations with the community. The backup battery is a Band-Aid, and it can be a great resource, but it's not a permanent resource. It's not a permanent solution to the problem. I'm going to look through some of these questions. So Michael Freeman, what do you do if you live in a building and the elevator is out? So DAR is not an emergency response program. And we get a lot of questions too from the public. It was really this most recent activation with the winter storms was very complicated to navigate, because so many people were trapped inside their homes, and they knew DAR existed. They knew that we were advocates, and they were hopeful that we could get them assistance. And we can. It's just not. It's not us going out and performing rescues. So if you're trapped in your home, and the power is out, and you need evacuation assistance. For example, we experienced people that had down power lines that were blocking the only exit. And the fire department was so impacted that maybe they weren't responding. That's when I hear about it. I get on the phone with Cal OES, and I am talking to my contacts at the governor's office, and I'm making sure that they go down the chain and they have a conversation with the local police and the local emergency response, and they ensure it's prioritized. And I get usually a call back within 30 to 45 minutes with the result of what's happening. But DADAR is not here to perform rescues. And also, by and large, the individuals that make up our organizations are individuals with access and functional needs. So a lot of the times, we're also the individuals that need support during these events. That does not put us in it puts us in a precarious circumstance if we needed to be the ones performing the rescues. So we really rely on our support networks with the local government agencies to ensure that that piece is covered. And when we hear gaps, that's when we perform our advocacy duties and ensure that we're having those conversations with local VOADs and local community government agencies and the emergency response efforts that are in the area. I'm going to scroll up a little bit as well.
There are a number of questions here, Emily, about transportation. You mentioned that, transportation in the areas you described is hard enough to find on a sunny day. How the heck do you do it during all of this going on?
Mm-hmm. So a lot of our DARCs have MOUs with local transportation agencies in their area. So, for example, I know TCIL has a MOU with a local agency that owns an accessible bus. So they can ensure that individuals have the access to get in and out on that accessible vehicle. The other is, and it may be that individual has very minimal, they're not coming with a wheelchair, for example, that needs that accessibility feature. So we can pay for an Uber to get you in and out. And if it's a large scale issue, like, the individuals on life support, on hospice care in their home, that unfortunately there's no way for us to perform that movement. So that needs to be relied upon with the local emergency providers. So we need to call Cal OES, and ensure that our 911 operators understand the needs, and that the fire department or an ambulance can move them safely to, a hospital. So there's a few ways we can pivot it. As I said, we're not emergency workers. We are available to provide resources in an emergency, and it's not a one size fits all. So it's difficult to accomplish it in perfection. There's going to be gaps. We're constantly finding those gaps and looking to bridge them and find advocates and further funders to make sure that those gaps are bridged. But that's how we would go about, for instance, an emergency need with somebody that has accessible transportation needs. We've got MOUs with accessible bus agencies that ensure that those individuals have access to leave their home and get to a hotel. And then once they're at a hotel, we book accessible hotel rooms to ensure that their needs are met there.
Okay, I see Walter has a couple questions in the chat. getting portable batteries are not a solution. Yep.
Yep.
Yep. Yep. Are you looking, Walter's question, I think, and maybe some, are you looking at, for people at high risk, some, solutions around residential battery systems that are residential generator systems?
So that's not a capacity that we have at this time, right? We're limited based off of the funding that we can have. What does happen? So I know PG&E, if there's a large scale power outage, will mobilize to do generators on the power lines to ensure that there is access to power. But large scale residential generators, that's a high goal. But that's also a lofty goal. That's very complicated in practice. Also, it's complicated with the stopgaps around how funding works at a 501(c)(3), right? We have specific categories and metrics of individuals we're looking to provide assistance to. So a residential neighborhood is made up of a very diverse group of individuals that may not fit into the categories of who we're looking to assist, and how we're looking to mobilize that assistance. So it's certainly a thought, but that's not anything that's been on our radar as of now. That's a whole different ballgame of what services look like. PG&E also does have generator programs, solar programs, and if that's something that you're interested in, certainly an availability to take a look at that.
There are a lot of questions here. I'll just kind of summarize it. I'm sure people will pop in with more specific, but there's a lot of policy questions mixed into the questions in chat. What is CFILC doing in its policy arm to kind of address some of these very bigger and thorny emergency issues?
Yeah, that is, I would love to say at this juncture, that's a question for me, but we would need to have Dan and Goldie on the line for a question like that, to go over how they are performing their system change advocacy. And I'm certainly here to be a collaborator on it, but that's a different department for me.
Well, that might be an October call. So, but I do see a lot of policy issues woven into some of these questions.
Yeah, I mean, we're having pretty frequent conversations with government agencies on what can be done. Disaster isn't going away. And it's a very complicated and convoluted issue because it's developing, right? It's not as though we have been living in infrastructure in California in which disasters have never occurred, but the rate in which they are occurring and the rate in which it is coming to the forefront of a need is a newer issue as we experience climate change. Global warming and cooling has really changed how weather appears here in California. It's become a lot more dramatic. And so it's something that is at its infancy, at its core. It's at its infancy in how we're developing policy around it and how we're advocating around it. It's a developing issue. And we're looking to respond, but there's a lot of moving parts with that kind of approach.
Now you talk about batteries, and batteries only go so far.
Mhm.
Are some people eligible to get more than one battery? I know that takes quite a bit to recharge these batteries.
Mhm.
Well, so
Yeah,
somebody gets multiple equipments that they depend on for their independence or safety, their life support. Can they get more than one?
absolutely. So when we determine what a battery looks like for a consumer, we take a pretty holistic approach to it. Our DDAR coordinators reach out and perform an assessment in which they ask, hey, what kind of equipment do you have in your home? If they've got a lot of equipment that needs power, they'll probably get our 6000X battery that we have available, which is the highest charge. But for example, to kind of put it into terms of how that battery can be used, a 6000X battery, it's likely to give a full charge to a power chair. And then it's pretty much done. It might have a little bit of juice left over for maybe a CPAP machine to run it for a couple cycles. So it's not really intended to be used for maybe longer than a day. But if we see, hey, you've got a power chair, you got a CPAP machine, you've got a lift for your bed, you're probably going to get two 6000Xs, or you're going to get a 6000X, maybe a 3000X and a 15 for that CPAP. The CPAP is going to be more akin to a 1500X. So you can absolutely get additional batteries, especially too, you may not be the only power user in your home. So you could have a partner or a child or another dependent living in your home that uses power to charge their devices as well. So multiple batteries can absolutely be distributed to those families based on the need, with the intention that a backup battery, right, it's a temporary solution to a problem that you're experiencing. So a backup battery's intended use is probably going to last you no more than 2 days before hotel accommodations are needed. Walter, I see you didn't receive an assessment for a battery. If you want to go ahead and you've got a lot of comments here, I want to make sure I'm addressing them in a positive way. And I want to make sure I'm addressing concerns if you're not receiving a battery assessment or batteries properly. So I'm going to go ahead and put our email address, ddar@cfilc.org, in the chat. If you need to follow up with the battery assessment that you received, and I need to follow up with the local DDAR, so I do want to make sure ILCs don't provide batteries. Not all ILCs are part of the DDAR program, but our DDARCs are providing assistance for backup batteries. If you need me to follow up on the electricity needs that you have with the DDAR, I'm happy to do so. Okay, sorry, Walter, your name shows up, or sorry, Richard, your name shows up as Walter. Yeah, typically what happens with a battery is we do a needs assessment. We ask you what your devices are, so input that information into, well, the DDAR holds onto that information. They input it into their customer service management software, whatever they're choosing to use. And the directive too is also to follow up about a month after the battery is delivered to make sure that you've experienced how it looks like to charge your devices on that battery. How long did it last you? When you charged your devices, we want you to use it to we want you in the first month to use it to the point of depleting the battery in its entirety for one full cycle, so we can figure out how it works for you, and if it's a sufficient battery. So if that didn't happen, we'll go ahead and make sure we follow up with the local DARC and conduct that assessment.
So let's see, Michael or McKay?
Nikai.
Mikai, you had your hand up quite a while ago.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yes, thank
Your
you.
question?
Yes, I'm the new systems change net advocate at the CIL. This is very great news for me. I'm glad to be here today. Personal experience. I'm on a ventilator 24/7, and I do have a lift, a ceiling lift, and this information is not getting out to the public as widespread as it should. I live in a building where we have a number of people who use chairs, medically assisted devices, and there are also a number of senior communities in the city that I live. And we recently, well, not recently, but we in February had a very bad rainstorm. And thankfully I did have daily battery to power my ventilator. I didn't want to use power my power chair simultaneously. Of course, my breathing takes precedent. However, the power was out for more than 10 hours. And I was getting very distressed because wondering how long the Yeti would last. You know, consumers who in my building who need insulin and medication refrigerated. You mentioned DART. If you could tell me what those abbreviations mean, and if you just put your contact in the chat, because one of the things we do as systems change advocates is extensive outreach, helping ourselves with information.
Also, let me just summarize then that your concerns is the information getting out to the people who need it?
Well,
Ellie will put the darn what that means again in the chat.
But also in terms of resident batteries, as we are getting people out of institutions into community settings with different medical conditions and abilities, it seems to me, like Walter said, we should advocate for more residential power solutions. Here I am in a building where we all own, having the capacity to have Tesla or dental batteries in our complex would help the elevators possibly evacuate if need to, or stay in place until the. So I just want to encourage, and I will be reaching out to Dan to see how we can advocate as systems change, advocates for this technology. Also, assessments. Nations have different experiences with assessments. I never received an assessment. So I'll be contacting you because I was just given the Yeti because I was never compromised. So I didn't receive an assessment, and there are many people in this community who
So
never
you bring up lots of issues, and I just want to be able to also include the other people who are waiting in the queue.
I understand, but
But
answering people in
yeah,
chat, and I have recently taken some.
Yeah, Makai, I appreciate that feedback. It's difficult because in DDAR, we are kind of trapped within the confines of what our funders dictate we can use the funds for. So we're doing our best with the limited resources that we have in our toolkit. The issue of disaster relief, preparation, recovery is a larger issue with gaps abound. I mean, we would see it even in long-term recovery at United Way. What happens when you lose your home and cost of lumber goes up because of inflation, and there's only $200,000 at a funder table. That's not going to build your home. So what I'm kind of getting at is there's advocacy gaps and angles that what I find a lot of the time when we bring these DDAR to the table and we start talking about what our capacity is, what it is that we're doing. I think it's mindful to be aware of the separation between DDAR's capacity in terms of what the program is developed to do today, how long the program has been around, right? Because it's still in its infancy stages. It was developed in 2020. We're 3 years down the line, and navigating with kind of limited funding resources. So what really needs to happen in order to start seeing these kind of bigger thought concepts of generators for whole communities, we really need to start seeing that appear in systems change. And for there to be a collaborative process between the two, ensuring that government agencies are involved in large scale city infrastructure changes to support individuals and their needs around power. DDAR is an advocate in that, and a partner in that, but the program and the funding sources that we have to provide safety measures for the public are limited based off of what is available in our toolkit to pull from.
Ellie, do you want to take some of the other questions as well? I think they're in order for when they appeared.
Richard, I'm confused at your question.
Go ahead and take a question, Ellie, from John Romano, and then Sheila, and then Alex.
John, yeah, go for it.
Thank you very much, Allison. It's great to hear about what's going on. You're sort of on the tip of the spear with a lot of this stuff, and I get it. And we're really blazing new ground. So I'll just summarize what we're up to, and then I'll just ask for permission. Maybe I can reach out to you and talk to you. Not long, 15-20 minute conversation. I know you're probably very busy, but our approach has been here in Montana is to we applied for a grant to do a study, and this is really a top to bottom review of the emergency response program specifically on the Flathead Reservation north of Missoula, Montana. And so we're working with the county. We've kind of had limited bandwidth there in sort of rolling out this concept of, of greater access for AFN community, and in a supportive role during disasters. And so basically, what I'd like to talk to you about is, where the low-lying fruit is for new programs like this, what would be the constraints of case management, who could be likely partners for MOUs, and then, power company alliances, things like that, that could kind of pattern after the program, what you're doing. Love to hear your comment on that. I'm casting a large net here, but I just want to get some preliminary thoughts and have a chance to talk with you maybe later on.
Yeah, I think that's a good follow-up call. I actually get that question a lot, of kind of what the low-hanging fruit looks like, how to develop relationships with power companies. I also get a lot of questions from power companies from other states just looking for ways to get involved. I think one of the interesting and opportunities here that we have with PG&E, it's no secret, right? The PG&E funds came out of a devastating wildfire that took the lives of dozens of people, a lot of which had access and functional needs, and PG&E was found liable for that. That liability is what catapulted a need for them to begin offering funds for individuals with access and functional needs when they shut off the power, because that became mandated for them to do when we have heat and wind. There's going to be gaps when you work with a power utility company because you're working with a corporation that is intentions to limit funds based off of metrics and their responsibility. But I think it's a really beautiful place to start with the holding them accountable, because PG&E is not the only power utility company that's liable for infrastructural issues. I mean, we look at what happened in Texas back in 2020, where people froze in their homes because they didn't have power, because the lines were so poorly kept up with. So one of the things that I aim for with DIDAR, with working with a power utility company, is ensuring that as we develop this program, as we continue to be in the public sphere with what limited funds we have, we can begin to continue to build and support systems for the gaps that surround working with a power utility company. Also, to ensure that when PG&E's liability in providing funds is no longer there because they have an end date, that we're collaborating with other power utility companies to ensure that it's such a successful program, they choose to continue. That it changes the precedent of how power utility companies see their involvement in protecting their consumers. You're limited by constraints in that. So I'm always advocating that our DDRCs look for other opportunities to get funding, and that we relinquish our focus on batteries and start focusing on other issues like emergency planning, advocacy, and those pieces. I'd love to have a follow-up conversation. I'll go ahead and put my personal email in the chat if you want to reach out to me at any point. We can set up a meeting and we can start talking about what it looks like to set up a program like this in other states, and kind of what to look out for and how to develop your partnerships, I think, with a little bit more preparation than I think we had the opportunity of having here at CFILC, because, like I said, this program was born out of litigation. So movement was kind of fast-paced to get things up and mobilized.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to it.
I see another question from Montana. Alexandra?
Want to go for it?
Yeah. Go ahead, Alexandra. Question?
DDARC's used for what you could consider pre-emergency hazard mitigation planning, a person who has a disability. You know, instead of just focusing, not every state has got California's funding from their power companies. So different approach needs to be used to that. It's like, I see the energy audits you've got, but the resource options, how does that work with going beyond just what the DDARC can provide? It's like, you know, there's like a whole range of different kind of power options, range, you know, solar and whole house power, you know, which are pricey, but other kind of issues. It's like, how do the DDARCs address the whole range of things, not just what they can provide, and not just doing the energy audit?
So DDAR, I think this kind of gets back into the advocacy piece, right? With systems change and local systems change and local government offices and local municipalities. The offerings of DDAR, it's complicated, right? And I think we get into this stopgap often when we come out into the public sphere and we start advocating for what we provide. We hear a lot about what we're not providing, and we kind of get put into the forefront of a one-size-fits-all agency. We are here to provide advocacy and outreach and work with systems change, and to work with local municipalities and government offices to try to influence change around the gaps that we see. But DDAR, the program is not, the infrastructure of the program is not a one-size-fits-all program. We're not emergency responders. Our job is to kind of work in tandem with what exists within the local cities and counties that we participate in. So, for example, one way that I urge our DDARCs to kind of perform the advocacy and outreach that's needed. We see it even there too, of us getting kind of siloed into the experts, which it's a collaborative process, is work with your local VOADs, your volunteer organizations active in disaster. Every county should have a VOAD. And this is made up of individuals that respond, that prepare, that work within the sphere of what disaster advocacy looks like, and push for change within their county region on both preparation, response, and recovery. And these are where all of the participants are, and should be in each room. And if your local county does not have a VOAD, you should be reaching out to your local government offices and ensuring that they begin the process of generating one. Disaster is not going away. And it is not a one size fits all for any one agency to be responsible for all moving parts. It's a collaborative process between all of the local agencies within the footprint, whether that's 501(c)(3)s. We see a lot of religious groups that participate in relief efforts, and preparation efforts and fund those efforts. And there's state VOADs as well. Depends on how big your state is. California is too big for state VOAD, so we have it pretty spliced up. But your counties really should have VOADs as well. And that's where the conversation needs to begin around how you plan infrastructure for emergency response, around how emergency preparation and relief efforts look in your county, who's responsible for what areas, in terms of, and then who has the resources, where are those resources put, and it ensures that you're not duplicating the kinds of services that you have to offer.
But this is Alexandra, but when you listen to like Dawn Albrecht at Tri-County and Humboldt, it's like, it's hard for me to imagine that Dawn, when she works with an individual consumer, would just talk about the things in the DDAR toolkit. I mean, so many of the folks in independent living centers, I used to work at one in California, so many of them have like a whole range of other kind of skills, and just bringing in, this is what we can provide. That's great. It's a way to get things, but working through the process of planning that you encourage the DDARCs to do, needs to bring in the entire range of options. And would they be able to, if they identified a different thing, say the person needs some kind of small solar devices, would they be able to advocate with, help them advocate for how they might get one from different funding source?
Yeah, absolutely. If those funding sources, especially if those funding sources exist within the county. So, for example, when we go off and drop off a battery, it's not the approaches that we take because we're networked within the services that our county provides within the independent living network. There's going to be a whole myriad of resources that they come with, or local programs that they're aware of. And it's difficult to say, because this is, again, where I get into, it's not a one size fits all. I wouldn't be able to tell you off the top of my head what resources are in DRAIL's catchment. But that local agency, that local DDARC would, and they would be able to go off and drop off a battery and, sit there and discuss with the consumer, what are your needs and what other needs might you have, and conduct additional assessments based off of the state funding that they have, and the other programs that they have at their agency, because they're not just DDAR coordinators, they are ILCs that have a myriad of other support systems built into their infrastructure. DDAR is one program, but they may have so many different options to work with within just their independent living network, their center, or the local agencies that are located within their county districts.
I want to pipe in here on your question, Alexandra, and what you said, Ellie, about helping people with their plans and what you're talking about right now. How honest and straight are you with people in their plans in terms of the timing of the response gap? That they're, big emergency like those winter storms, the possibility of people getting to you quickly is pretty darn low. And is that part of the planning that you do with people? Are you that straight with people? I mean,
yeah. And our DDARC coordinator, first of all, they're not shy people, but they're also people that have a lot of experience themselves with what being in an emergency looks like. They have accessing functional needs. They live and breathe this work and have a very deep understanding of what it feels like to be left out of the picture with emergency response. So, what they will typically do, our DDARCs are contractors of CFILC. So they all have their different flavor and flair of how they provide their services. But in their scope of work, they drop off their battery to the consumer's home, and they'll unpack it and put it wherever the consumer notates they'd like it. And that's a really great time for the DDAR coordinator to start conducting emergency planning, right? And in your home, I see where your exits are. Oh, it looks like you've got your exits blocked, or you've got to do a little bit of wiggling and finessing to get your wheelchair out of your front door because you've got shoes or objects in the way of your exit routes. Just so you know, these are time frames, right, of how you get response. You might be stuck here. What are your plans? How do you navigate what it looks like to have an emergency and have everything that you thought you were going to do just go out the window? And so they sit there and they'll have these conversations in real time at the consumer's home. Oftentimes, a lot of our DDARCs perform these assessments in-house, in person, to go over what emergency planning looks like, how to stay safe. I have some DDARCs that even have emergency preparation movie days. Like Cow Life has a movie day where individuals can come to their center. They provide pizza and popcorn, and they watch a movie that shows, like an end of the world kind of action movie, which a lot of them are kind of so far off the beaten path of what things really look like. But they'll start going over, they pause it and they go, did you see those exit routes? They were blocked. Or what did you see that was done wrong here? To kind of put it into kind of perspective of how we visualize, things happening on screen. So we do a lot of these approaches with consumers to make sure that they have additional tools in their toolkit of what response looks like, how to stay safe, how to be prepared, and then just the realness around understanding that emergency response when you're in the thick of an emergency can be very, very, very difficult to receive. If you've got an entire county that has people have there's roadblocks all over the place, it's going to be difficult to get to you. And they may need to break down a tree before they can even get up your road, which could put you in your home for a couple of hours just waiting for somebody to get up to you. So these are very real conversations that are being had with the consumers from the DDAR coordinators.
In terms of your program and you're looking at new contracts, what do you see as being different or expanding in the future with these contracts, if and when you get them?
Yeah, so for starters, we're working towards ensuring that what's offered on one side of the state is also offered on the other side of the state, right? PG&E funds stop in Central California. They do not cover over to Southern California. Those individuals are not qualified for a battery portion of the program at this time, and they're not qualified for hotel accommodations at this time because our funding doesn't allow for it. We're working on contracts down south to make sure that the availability of services that we have to start with is equitable. And then we would like to pivot focus towards what happens after disaster happens. We had for a while the Richard DeVelder Relief Fund that kind of sprung out of 2018 to ensure that people had their ability to get new devices. They had lost one in a wildfire. I'd like to see that reinvigorated. And that's certainly a goal for 2023, 2024 to reinvigorate those funds, that funding pot, and to start seeking out grants for replacing damaged or lost assistive technology. The next would be to ensure that we're seeking funds outside of power utility companies to start expanding how individuals can receive backup batteries if that's what they choose. And I know that there's intention around the Freedom Tech Loan, which we're not currently providing, which would provide opportunities for loans to get the kind of technology that you need in order to, if you're not qualified for the battery portion of the program, purchase one at a lower rate through CF or make accommodations in other capacities. So it's baby steps as we kind of navigate towards how we bridge the gaps of the services that we have, and then work on expanding to ensure that the services that we do have, we can add to the menu options to ensure that the approach is more sustainable long term.
This is such a huge and overwhelming issue
Yeah.
for so many of us. Yeah. Well, we've got about 7 minutes left. We'll give you last words, Allie, to what did we not ask you that you want to contribute? I know people know how to find you now, so beware. Your phone's going to be ringing or your email is going to have an avalanche.
Yeah, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to go ahead and discuss further. You know what? I realized, Mikai, I gave you an incorrect beginning of my phone number when I did give you my number. So I'm putting it in the chat again for you. That is my work cell. You guys are welcome to reach me on that one, as well as Allison at cfilc.org. I think, CF is open to learning and leaning into how we develop this program even further. It's in its infancy stage. This kind of, or child phase is how I always kind of playfully refer to it at. Its infancy stage was probably 21, 22. We're kind of in that child stage where the programs will be our menu item, as I like to kind of refer to it, of options of resources that we have today and currently. I would say that smoother sailing, where we've been building the plane as we've been flying it for sure. But we know what we're here to do and what we can do. And now it's about continuing to add to the infrastructure for a mature program to be able to fill in the gaps that are needed, while also tapping the local agencies and state agencies to step up to the plate and ensure that they're taking on the accountability that's needed in the state of California. And then at a federal level, there's so much change and influence that needs to be done on that federal level to ensure that people with access and functional needs aren't left behind in a disaster. So lean into your systems change advocates, be a loud voice in a small room. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. Any last minute questions from, and Naya, you can put up the poll, please.
That should be out.
Thank you. Okay, there's some questions we'd like to hear from you to answer, those of you who can. Oh, Ellie, thank you. This was very enlightening and helpful in terms of what the program is and what the program isn't, and that we all have some responsibility here for the the tremendous advocacy that's needed. This is only a little, as you said, tiny baby step. And I'm sure if you were running the world, it wouldn't look like this.
If I was running the world at this point on disaster, things would look a lot different policy wise. But
Right.
yeah, it's a long haul process with evolving climate needs, especially disaster response, recovery, and relief is a long haul effort that we all have responsibility in.
I'm sure it's quite challenging to run a program within its confines when you see the landscape as so needy, so much more.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you for doing this today. And thank you all for joining us and filling out the poll. And tune in next month, August 10th, for a discussion on hybrid meetings, which I know is particularly important with the Brown Act, I think it's called in California, which is asking all government-related advisory groups to only meet in person, like the COVID is over, and it really makes for a lot of inequality in terms of who can participate. So tune in next month as well. And thanks again, all of you. Stay safe and stay cool. Thank you.
I didn't have time to say thank you, Allison, for the comment, and I will reach out with you and also talk to my
Yeah,
system
we'll get our systems change
Yeah.
connections together, and I'd love to see some additional movement in those areas.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, I'm signing off, Allie, unless there's anything else you didn't need.
All good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.